welcome back to my channel and welcome to another vintage tips and tricks video. I have a weird hand. Let's address that straight away. I hurt my finger and now it's taped so that I can't move it. You might ask me how I hurt my finger. I'm not gonna lie, the way that I did it is kind of embarrassing. I have like a bit of an addiction to cracking my knuckles and it wouldn't crack. This one wouldn't crack and it was really annoying me, and over the space of 24 hours I kept trying to crack it until it got to the point that it was like sore and swollen from me trying to crack it. It didn't crack and now it hurts and I can hardly move it. So your girl is an idiot. In my last video, which was a couple of weeks ago now, despite my New Year's resolution to regularly upload, I promised you that I would do a video about vintage fashion labels. I wanted to go specifically into this because it's a great way of working out if you have a true vintage piece, but it can be very difficult to find information on vintage fashion labels. There is a great source in the Vintage Fashion Label Guide, which I believe is by the Vintage Fashion Guild. I will put the link for that down below because they have a collection of labels there where you can go and have a look at the history, and it will tell you probably what era the garment is from, etc. And they're adding to it all the time. But there is a lot of fashion out there and a lot of the labels are not on their guide. So that is the tricky part, is knowing what you're dealing with. So I thought I would go into that a little bit today. If you watched my previous video, not last week, but a while back now, about how to spot true vintage items, you'll know you want to look at the interior of the item, look at whether or not it's handmade, depending on the area you're looking at. Things like metal zips or fastenings are going to give the era away. But also a vintage fashion label is going to tell you a lot. First of all, if it doesn't have a label, then you are probably looking at something from the 1930s to the 1960s or the early 1960s, purely because things were often boutique made or tailored, and the garments were made specifically for the individual, or they were bought off the rack and then tailored in store. It was part of the service, and items didn't have a label on them if they weren't mass produced, because things weren't really mass produced during that time. So if something doesn't have a label and it's got things like hand stitching inside, metal zippers or fastenings, and it generally kind of fits the shape and style of the era that you're looking at, I'm talking more specifically about the like 30s to 50s, then you're probably looking at a true vintage piece. The tricky part is then, of course, trying to figure out the year that the piece was made, or like get more specific about it, which can be really hard. I just go with the decade. Like, you can kind of see early and late, like early 40s has still got a bit of the 1930s in it, early 50s has still got a bit of the 1940s in it, and so on. So, you know, it kind of bleeds into each other, but you can generally pinpoint the decade based on the major fashions of each time by just doing some research into what women wore during that era. I also have videos explaining what women wore in different eras. I will link them below. But if a garment does have a label inside and you're wondering what that label means, here is a few pointers. First of all, a vintage piece from the 40s and 50s, if it has a label, is going to be something that was off the rack. So it was going to be bought from a department store, and it's more of kind of a general, you know, pret-a-porter style piece, I guess. And one of the big things is it's going to be sewn in. It's not these little flappy tags that we have today that didn't start coming out until around the 1960s, 70s. They're going to be well and truly stitched into the garment and finished really nicely. For example, look at this. Even this one is a little bit loose. You can see that it's like stitched on either side. That is a 1950s piece. But if you look at something like this beautiful jacket that I have, this is a 1960s jacket and it's still fully stitched into the garment. So the finishing of the labels was much better. The other thing is they will often not have a size, and they often won't specify the materials that the garment is made of because they're boutique bought and it's information that people would have got by talking to the person they were buying the garment from. Whereas these days we go in, we shop, or we shop online, and we want to know all that information without ever having to talk to anyone because we're completely antisocial now. If you go onto the Vintage Fashion Guild and look at some of the information they have about labels, you'll see a lot of information about wool and putting postcodes and stuff on things. For me, I'm from Australia and I currently live in the UK, so some of that stuff doesn't apply because the Vintage Fashion Guild is talking specifically about the US. But I will say that some things apply in the sense that, for example, my original men's vintage 1930s suit jacket has the original label sewn in, and it has so much information on it. It literally says who made the jacket, where it was made. Even though I got hold of it in Australia, it says that it, like, originally the company was from the UK and this piece was made in Australia, but under the name of that company. Like, it's really detailed. So then you can go away and do research on that label, or if you're like me, you can take your smartphone everywhere and literally Google everything as you're looking at the garments. So then you kind of know straight away what you're dealing with. For something like my 1950s sweater here, this one is from America, but it doesn't have a postcode or anything, and it's by a brand called Bermuda. It says literally a Bermuda original. Now, I Googled this and found very little information on the brand Bermuda. Obviously, it is a place, but I think the fashion label existed a long time ago and is probably defunct now. However, I did discover a whole ton of stuff listed on Etsy and eBay that is all specified as being from the 1950s. So I felt quite confident that there was lots of very similar items. I had said that I felt this was from the 1950s, but it was nice to go in and see that other people had also placed similar garments by the same label in the same era. So that can really help, even though you're not getting a definitive answer because you don't find out about the company, you're at least kind of getting the help of other people, your peers within the community. Same with this jacket by, what is it, Belvera? Yeah, Belvera Fashions Sydney. A little research told me that this was a really popular boutique fashion label in Sydney during the 1960s and 70s. Again, I can't find a current website. It's not a company that is still going today that I know of. So I just have to base the information on other listings that are online and what people have said in those listings. And that is that these were like high-end fashion pieces from the 60s and 70s. So I placed this jacket because of the style in the early 60s. Yeah, I'm gonna say early 60s. So, I'm quite confident of that after doing my research and finding many other pieces from the same era on Etsy. Lucky last piece that I'm going to show you today just to demonstrate what I'm talking about is my gorgeous green suit that you would have seen a lot of on Instagram because I freaking love it. This piece is very similar to a Lily Ann, as someone pointed out to me on Instagram. It is a complete knockoff, and that is because the company is Jovan Fashions, who, again, I couldn't source a true website with a history of Jovan Fashions online. However, I found a forum of lots of people asking about this brand, and someone in the forum was saying they had done a lot of research and discovered that Jovan Fashions was a off-the-rack label that got in trouble and got sued by Lily Ann for knocking off their designs. So I like that. I have an interesting piece, and I know by the placement of the label, in the 1940s, often they put the label, if it was an off-the-rack piece, into the inner lapel of the jackets, and also that Jovan Fashions is a label that was knocking off Lily Ann's, and Lily Ann's were a very popular suit, a very well-made suit from the 1940s and 50s. And by the shape of this one, I'm pretty certain it's from the 1940s. As you can see, guys, if you do a little bit of detective work and piece everything together, you start to get an idea of the era that the piece you're looking at might be from. You might get really lucky and just find a label that has the year the piece was manufactured in. Sometimes that happens. Or the piece might be really famous or by a really famous label, and you can go online and find the magazine ad from when the piece was released and you know exactly what year it's from. But more than likely, those pieces are going to be A, super expensive, and B, not the kind of things you're going to find in a local thrift store that you're going to wear every day. So it takes a little bit more work to find out what those pieces are that we can readily get our hands on, but that's kind of half the fun of it. So make sure you get to know and do a bit of research about what women wore in different eras, or gentlemen as well. This is relevant to both sexes. That's really going to help you get an idea, just kind of looking at a piece on the rack as to what era it might be from. Then look at the inside and ascertain as to whether or not it has modern stitching techniques and tailoring techniques. And then start looking at things like what material it's made from and the label that's inside, or if there is no label at all. I hope that this video was helpful to you guys. If you like these kinds of videos and you'd like more information on how to ascertain whether your piece is true vintage or not, let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!